I got this chest of drawers on Marketplace for free, and in this video I'm going to show you exactly how I turn it into a neutral rustic farmhouse piece in a few simple steps. Now, ultimately free is the best price when you are flipping furniture. However, that always comes with challenges. This piece was rough. It had a lot of scratches, it had missing handles, and it looked like it may have been home to a mouse at some point. The first thing I did was get my carbide scraper out to start removing some of this existing finish. Now, if you're unfamiliar, a carbide scraper is a tungsten carbide blade. It is a tool that you use to remove existing finish, so paint, varnish, anything like that. Shortly after starting though, I did find this mark, and unfortunately it was a burn. How deep it went though, I wasn't sure, so I gave the piece a clean down on top with some vinegar and water, waited for it to dry, and then got my sander out so that I could determine how deep the burn had actually gone. I knew after a little bit of sanding that this wasn't going to do. It was too deep to just keep on sanding it down, and filling can be troublesome because you have to get all of that charred mess out and then fill it, but it can fail over time. So on to plan B, which was having a look at how this top was actually attached, and I was lucky because it was only screwed into place. The bonnet on top, however, was nailed in, and normally this is screwed up and underneath as well, but it wasn't. It was nailed on. So I got my chisel out, I got my hammer out, I tried to bash this one off. It took a lot to jimmy this little bonnet up. Once I finally did remove it, I could see why it was so hard. The nails on this thing were ginormous, but I did get it off in the end. It was a little bit damaged, but only on one side, so I knew I would still be able to use it. It was then on to actually removing the top, which was simple. It was just 3 screws on either side. Once it was removed and flipped over, I hammered the nails back through to this side and removed all of them. So that I could line this up evenly on the flip side, I got a few measurements, made a couple of marks so that from the front, I would be able to line this one up easily. Once I had lined it up at the front, I made sure to clamp it down so that it wouldn't wiggle around while I was trying to drill in my pilot holes. Instead of going back into the same hole that there was previously to drill into the top, I made new pilot holes. So I went around 2 centimeters away from the existing ones so that when I put the screws back in, it would be going into solid timber and not into the channel that the previous screw had created. Then it was just simply putting those new screws in and making sure that everything was firm. I lifted this one up and gave it a bit of a jiggle to make sure that it wasn't going to be flying off, and it was solid. I knew I would have those holes to fill, but I also had a shadow issue. So I sanded this top off to see how deep that shadow was going to be, and it was still there when I had sanded. So enter bleach. Now you can use a wood specific bleach for this. You could use oxalic acid to remove stains and shadowing. However, I found in the past that good old house bleach works just as well. If you have a sunny day, that's the best time to do bleaching because the UV will actually help to speed up the process. If you do have an overcast day though, like I did, you can use a hairdryer on the highest heat setting, as heat will also speed up the bleaching process. You can do as many rounds of bleach as you like, but you do need to remember that this creates a lot of porosity in the timber, so you have to come back and neutralize it. If you don't, it will just continue to absorb moisture out of the air. After I finish bleaching, I like to use watered down vinegar to neutralize my surface, but I do make sure that the timber is completely bone dry. You cannot use wet bleach and vinegar together because it's a pretty toxic combination. So if you do a vinegar wash to neutralize, make sure that it is completely bone dry. Moving on, I gave the rest of the piece a thorough clean down. I used crud cutter, which is a degreaser. It'll cut through dirt, grease and grime, and then came around with just some plain hot water to remove any of the residue that may have been left on the surface. I then got my vacuum cleaner out and got into the piece, into all of those little drawer runner spaces, and got rid of all the cobwebs that were sitting underneath. Once everything was completely dry, I used my carbide scraper to remove the existing finish that was on the rest of the piece. These are a fantastic tool to have if you are thinking about flipping furniture for profit, because they do save you a lot of time, and you can get into a lot of spaces with them that you would normally just have to hand sand, especially little legs like this. You can get them from Bunnings in Australia, or you can jump online and grab them on sites like Amazon or Temu. Once the majority of the finish was off, I started sanding, and because I had removed most of the finish, I started with 120 grit sandpaper and then moved up the grade. So I went from 120 grit up to 180 and then followed with 240 grit. Before going up to that 240 grit on the drawers though, I made sure to measure up and then drill my little pilot holes for my new handles so that when I came back with that 240 grit sand sandpaper, it would actually take my pencil marks back off. Once everything was completely sanded down smooth, it was time to paint wash. Now, if you're unfamiliar, paint washing is essentially a technique where you are taking a watered down mix of paint and applying it to the surface of the timber to change the color without necessarily losing the grain of the timber. You can create a multitude of looks with paint washing, and it's all determined by what color paint you put into the wash. Now, if I had have gone in and just put a clear coat, a clear seal onto this piece, I would have so much variation in the timber. One, I'd bleached the top, so I'd lost a little bit of the natural warmth that would be showing through. The sides were made out of Oregon. You can see that beautiful Oregon grain, but when stained, it is orange. And the body of the piece was some type of hardwood that was quite gold. So it would have looked all higgledy-piggledy. So I'm using this paint wash to give a more uniform result throughout without losing the timber grain. If you want to learn a little bit more about paint washing to create raw timber looks like this one, then I've created a guide through the link in my bio, which will teach you everything that you need to know. My raw timber furniture flipping guide will specifically walk you through how to identify different tones in the timber so that you know what paint colors to put into your wash to achieve different results. It walks you through how to mix up that paint wash, how to apply it, and then how to seal for longevity in the end. But I also went and put into that guide my cheat sheet. So that gives you examples of all of the custom color combinations that I am using currently with ratios and names of paint so that you can hit the ground running and start doing some really beautiful raw timber looks. For this piece, I did 3 rounds of paint wash. I sanded in between my first and second coat with 600 grit sandpaper, which just ensures that you're knocking down any raised grain, any texture that might pop up on the surface of the piece. And then I went on to wax sealing. By far my favorite finish to have on a piece like this, something that's rustic and neutral, is a wax finish because you can get a really beautiful matte look from it. This is FIDDES Supreme Wax Polish in the color Light. It goes on matte, but it can be buffed out to a really beautiful sheen. But I just love how easily you can apply it. You can see I'm just using a microfiber cloth here. Once I'd applied wax to the fronts of the drawers, I installed some new hardware. I wanted something that was going to be in alignment with that rustic country feel. So I got these scalloped cup pulls in an antique brass, which I thought was a really beautiful contrast with the paint wash tone. Prior to putting wax onto the top and the body of the piece, I secured that bonnet back down. I screwed from underneath and used some glue as well for extra support. And when I actually put the wax on, I made sure not to buff it out. I just wanted to have a really beautiful matte, soft look. So guys, just a reminder of where we were: burn marks, missing handles, scratches. She was looking a little rough around the edges, and this is where we are now. It's soft. It has a subtle color palette. I absolutely love those handles with this piece. You can still see that beautiful timber grain coming through. It would go into anyone's home, but it does have a lot of quirks. It's that really cool rustic sort of vibe, and it's a practical dresser. These drawers are so deep. I can see a multitude of things going into these drawers. But as always, I would love to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comments, is this one a nail or a fail?